Alrighty, so we're talking about while loops, for loops, and do loops. While loop is a pretest, meaning that you're testing before you go into the loop, like this. Bool done is equal to false. While not done, that means that if this wasn't true, then we wouldn't execute any of this stuff. However, it is true because of that. We could rewrite this as while done is equal to false. Typically, people who are starting out programming would rather see an explicit comparison like that rather than the exclamation not sign operator. The for loop is also a pretest. Here's our example of a for loop. For int x is equal to 1, x is less than 100, less than or equal to 100, x plus plus, and then add that to our sum. Then, of course, we probably want to print it out at the end. And then lastly, the do while loop, which we're about to demonstrate. So our 3 rules of thumb, and I'm repeating this because I just started the recorder. If something absolutely has to be done at least one time, you can use a do loop. If something needs to be repeated over and over with a counter, use a for loop. Otherwise, use a while loop. And I will say again that you can do any loop with any one of these things. But, you know, some things lend themselves more naturally to others, to these loops than others. So, I think William suggested it. You run a program and then ask the user if they wish to do it again. That would be a great use for a do loop. So do, you know, run game. And then ask the user if they wish to repeat. Int repeat game. Cout 1 to repeat game, 2 to quit. Not quiet. And then you read that in to the repeat game variable. And then your while statement on your do loop would just say, oh, we better declare repeat game outside of the loop. We don't even have to assign it to a value though because we're not checking it. It's a post-test loop, so we're not checking it until we get here. Keep repeating this while repeat game equals 1. Be nice to assign it a 1, you know, just okay, there we go. When you write a do while loop, we do have to put a colon here. Every other time you write a colon, do not put, every other time we write a loop, do not put a semicolon after your loop statement. If you write a semicolon here, the while loop won't do anything. If you write a semicolon here, the for loop won't do anything. I'm not going to type it in. Enough of y'all have seen that happen when you're typing in the in-class assignments to know that that's true. Anytime you have a loop and you put a semicolon in it, it just short circuits it. It stops it from running. If it's a while loop, it'll probably run forever. If it's a for loop, it'll run through all the possible iterations and then nothing will happen. But if you put a semicolon there, it wouldn't even compile. But you do have to put the semicolon here, or else it doesn't know what the next statement is after the do loop. Okay, so this is example 1. Run a game, then ask the user if they wish to repeat. This is a good example of case A. Alrighty. Now I want y'all to fire up old Visual Studio. And instead of me typing code that you're going to type along with, at least at first, I want you to take a stab at coding this yourself. Okay, just for reference, since you're creating a new one, it's always nice to have, the header, the int main, and all that up in front of your eyes. What I want you to do is write a while loop that prints the numbers from 1 to 100. Then write a for loop that prints the numbers from 100 to 1 using minus minus, like x minus minus or something. And then lastly, write a do loop that prints the even numbers. Just to make it simple, prints the numbers from 100 to 200. Okay, take a stab at that, and then, if you remember the syntax, great. If you have the book, look it up. If you feel like being lazy, wait for me to give in and type it up here, which I will do. I assume that this note means just today and not. Of course, I'm going to give y'all some pointers.
Write it on the marker board if he meant more than one day.
Well, yeah. Blah, blah, blah. That's one way to do it. And then there's for, which has the syntax with the 2 semicolons in the middle. And then lastly, there's do. Do some stuff while semicolon. And this isn't a quiz. I'm going to, give the answers here in just a moment.
Did you know that Donald Trump hates Mexicans? Really?
So how many of y'all are morning people?
I'm like an always.
You're an always awake person. You don't count. You operate on 2 hours of sleep a day.
Not much. Or, sometimes it's not the day, but usually it is.
Yeah.
Usually go to sleep at like, I've been going to sleep at like 8 and waking up at like 10:30 or 11.
Ugh. All right. Write a while loop that prints the numbers from 1 to 100. Okay. I need a counter. I'm just going to call it C for counter.
Do you want me to go across the page or down the page?
For X. Doesn't matter, really. Okay, so I have my counter. I'm initializing it to 1, because this is our while loop, X. While X is less than or equal to 100, print X, and yeah, if you want to print them all out in a line, don't put the ENDL. If you want them all in a row, leave off the ENDL. If you want them in a column, put it on there. And make sure you add 1 to X. X is equal to X plus 1, or X plus plus, or plus plus X, whatever you like. A lot of people want to make this all work in one line, and so they want to just put plus plus here. That works in this case, since that's all the loop does, but I don't like changing the value of my counter until the very end of the loop. I'm going to test this. All right, I think it worked. What if we change the specs to only print even numbers? How would we do that? What kind of check do you do to make sure a number is even? Yeah, check the modulus. So in front of that C out, if x modulus 2 is equal to 0, we know it's an even number. All right, for loop time. Go from 100 to 1. Now, I already have a counter declared, right? I already have x declared, so I may as well just use that rather than make a new one. For x is equal to 100, that's our upper range. X is greater than or equal to 1. Keep repeating until x is no longer greater than or equal to 1. And then x minus minus. Same thing, C out x. And the do loop. Let's just recycle our counter again. I'm going to set it equal to its first value, its starting value, 100. And then my statement's going to say do or do not. There is no try. All right, do C out x, add 1 to x, and then I'm ready for my while statement. Keep repeating this while x is less than or equal to 200. All right, anybody getting mystery syntax errors? You should be twice as productive since you have 2 computers.
I'm half as productive because I'm doing 2 things. Yeah.
All right, is anybody hitting syntax errors? I'm looking over people's shoulders. I'm not seeing any.
Like a rubber band with twice the distance will have half the elastic force.
Yeah.
I'm like a rubber band.
Yeah.
Super, I never break.
Okay, let's add on a few more things. Use any kind of loop you like to sum the values of 1 to 1,000. That's enough. And display that sum. So if you like while loops, use them. If you like for loops, which are, by the way, the ultimate loops that everyone should always use. I'm kidding, but I love for loops. According to our rules, this would be a good use of a for loop. Why? Because we do have a counter involved. Just remember you need to create a sum variable above your loop, and then you can add to it each time.
You have to win the energy beam, Zechariah. This is a conversation.
Yeah. All right, since the for loop is the bestest, most awesomest loop ever, that's what I chose to implement up here. you did it another way, that's totally cool as well. If you did it another way and it doesn't work for you, let me know. I'll come back there and help.
This is funny. I don't need this is the X, so I don't need this to do anything. It's funny and it pertains to the lesson.
And I think I demonstrated this last time, but if I was going to change this code to calculate the product of all the numbers between 1 to 1,000, what would be the critical difference besides changing this to times, to a multiplication?
Couldn't you?
Some need to start at 1.
Exactly, sum or the product in this case would have to be 1.
Couldn't you just avoid using the sum and put that argument in the third argument in the for loop? I forgot the right word for it, I'm sorry.
You could do this.
Well, I just mean like, couldn't you just choose the value of x in that third argument up there, and then return the value, or sorry, see out the value of x. Instead of x plus plus, you just replace it with, or well, with just the sum you could, but if you're multiplying, you just put times equals.
Yeah.
It would work, but it would look gross, right? Is that what you're gonna say?
Yeah. Here's another example of something that would probably work, but it's kind of gross. It's abusing the syntax of the for loop. Here, instead of simply putting x plus plus here as my third step, my iterative step, I made it say sum plus equals x plus plus. However, I think that this would give the wrong answer because I think it would also add on a 1001. So I'd have to change this value as well, and so it forms a completely deceptive thing. So I'm going to undo that change. But you can tuck things away here inside the for loop that are not strictly loop related. I just don't recommend it. So our loop to multiply the values of 1 to 100 and display their product would look very similar. Use any kind of loop you like to multiply the values of 1 to 100 and display that product. So instead of a sum, let's call it product. You have to set it to 1 because if you multiply everything by 0, it's always 0. I think I'll make this a while loop because I'm feeling like it. So x is equal to 1 while x is less than or equal to 1,000. Product times equals x plus plus. And again, a C++ wizard would want us to put the plus plus right there on the same line, which would work. But I don't see the point in trying to shoehorn in as many things on one line of code as possible. And then I need to print that out. Now products increase astronomically fast as opposed to sums, geometrically fast. So we could suffer overflow. Do you remember what overflow is? It's when you exceed the capacity, the number of bits in that data type. I'll be real curious to run this and see if that happens. And when it happens, the product is suddenly going to turn negative. It's going to look really dumb. product of 1 to 100 is 0. What did I do wrong? I don't know. Okay. When I made it 1 to 10, it worked. 100 must be too large of a value. Try 20. Yeah, 20 is already experiencing overflow. 15. Seemed to work. So in order to allow going out to 100, maybe a long int would work. I'm going to make product a long int. See if that works. Nope. Can it at least get up to 50? Nope. Yeah, you see products get huge extremely quickly. $20 worked. I'm going to go back to 10 and make it an int again.
You change ours to 10.
All right, that's enough about loops, I think. Let's go to check the PowerPoint. I cannot think of a single other thing we need to cover on the topic of loops, but we're only halfway through the PowerPoint. For loop is also pretest. You can do, like I said, you can monkey with the syntax of a for loop. Here they are initializing two separate variables inside the initializer of a for loop. They just separated by commas. X equals 1, comma, y is equal to 1, semicolon, and then the rest of it look the same. That's valid code. People don't do it that often. Or here, they're going to increment both x and y. This is kind of silly, but you could do this. Like if you wanted to add 1 and 100 and 2 and 200 and 3 and 300 and 4 and 400, you could do it like this. You start off x at 100. Excuse me, nah, I don't even want to talk about that. You can omit the initialization step if it's already been done. If we've already set x equal to 0 or num equals whatever it's supposed to be here, just don't put anything in front of the semicolon. You can also omit the comparison statement if you're going to provide an explicit break in the middle. If number is greater than 10, then break. If you're doing that, then why are you writing a for loop? But you can't. And you can also skip putting something in the initializer, in the increment. The worst example of for loop abuse would be this. For, there we go. Now we have an infinite loop. That's the same thing as doing while true. That's a really cute little icon. It looks like a little crying walrus or something. I don't know.
Somebody punched him in the face over his tusks went the wrong way.
Yeah.
No longer, he's asymmetrical now. He'll never be perfect again.
So keeping a running total, this is what our code just did. The running total is an accumulated sum of numbers from each repetition of a loop. So you have to have an accumulator. We were calling it sum. Sum's a perfectly good word for it. In fact, that's what they did here. But this is the accumulator variable. Sum is our accumulator variable. And you can accumulate stuff, not only just series of numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but like if they were entering scores. And I'm pretty sure we've done stuff like that. You know, enter a series of numbers and add up the average, that kind of thing. Pretty sure we did that. Sentinels. A sentinel is when you have a value that has a special meaning. Like enter a number or -1 to exit. That -1 is a sentinel value. It means to stop at that. The loop is, it's not valid data. You can't have a test score of -1 unless your prof is a real jerk. So you can use that as the indicator that you want to stop entering data. Otherwise, you're probably tasked with doing something like this. Enter a score. You type in a score. It adds it. And then you ask them the question, do you wish to add another score? Yes, no. So they type yes. Enter another score. They type that in. Do you wish to enter another score? Yes, no. So that's taking 2 typings for each piece of data you're entering. Whereas if you say enter score or -1 to exit, they're just having to enter one thing. And that's useful if you do not know how many values will be entered. There are some times when you absolutely have to know how many data values are being entered. If you've allocated an array, and an array is only capable of holding a specific unit, a number of units, number of elements, like 10, then you would not want to use a sentinel value. You would want to have them enter 10 values, no more, no less. But if it's a varying amount, so bowling scores, you wouldn't want to let them type in -1 to quit the game because you're supposed to bowl the same number of rounds each time. Deciding which loop to use. The while loop is a conditional pretest. It iterates as long as a certain condition exists. You might use it for validating input. And I think, didn't we show an example of that where they typed in a number and then we wanted to make sure it was positive, and so if it was negative, it didn't escape the loop until they finally typed in valid data. The do while loop is a conditional post-test loop. It always iterates at least once. What's it good for? Well, they say repeating a menu, or like rerunning the program. The for loop is a pretest loop. It's good in situations where the exact numbers of iterations is known. I like my definition better when you know that you're going to be running a counter. Nested loops. You can nest loops inside of loops, just like you can put if statements inside of if statements. Let's print a goofy little table. That is a certain number of pixels, a certain number of asterisks wide, and a certain number of asterisks long. So down here at the bottom of main, here's our next little problem to solve. Print a rectangle that is 10 rows by 5 columns of asterisks. Alrighty, we're going to use a nested loop for that. Why are we going to use a nested loop? Because we're printing rows. This could be a variable, maybe next time it's going to be 20 rows and 10 columns. But for this case, we want to print 5 asterisks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we want to go to the next line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we want to go to the next line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So printing out the 5 is going to be done by the inner loop because it gets repeated more and more. And each time we're done with that inner loop, then the outer loop is going to increment. So the outer loop is going to be keeping track of how many rows we've printed. The inner loop is going to be keeping track of how many asterisks in that row, how many columns. So why don't we define our variables? The number of rows, the max rows. Max rows is equal to 10. Int max columns is equal to 5. Now we're going to have 2 loops. Somebody pick one. Do we want to use while loops or for loops? Yay. Y'all have learned well, young Padawans. Okay, so int C for column is going to start with 1, keep repeating while C is less than max calls. C++. That's our outer loop. Then for int R for row, I have that backwards. Scratch that, erase it, rewrite it. 4. And I'm going to use the whole word row rather than just R. For row is equal to 1, row is less than the max rows, less than or equal to row plus plus. The inner loop, the number of columns, the number of asterisks in each row. For int column is equal to 1, column is less than or equal to the maximum columns. Column plus plus. Now in the inner loop, we don't want to print a line feed or a carriage return because we just want to keep printing asterisks until we have printed that entire row. Once we printed that row, it's okay, or it's necessary to print, an end of line. So our inner loop here is not going to have an ENDL or a /n in it because we want to keep adding asterisks until we've added the required number. So let's just see out an asterisk. When we get to the end of that line, we have exited the inner loop and it's time to see out an end of line marker. Run it. There we go. 5 by 10. Does it meet our specs? 10 rows? Yep. 5 columns? It does. Quite often when you're asked to do something like that, you make the mistake that I did, which is starting off with the wrong outer and the wrong inner, and that just means that it would print, a 5 by 10 rather than a 10 by 5. And it's not really that big of a deal. If we were using arrays right now, this might be a little bit more fun because you could make a two-dimensional array, which is known as a matrix or a grid. And you could store numbers in it like in a spreadsheet. Each cell could contain a different piece of number, and you can do an awful lot of cool stuff like that. Y'all probably have seen games called roguelike games, where each grid has a different thing in it. You have a monster in one of them, and you have your character in another one, and the monsters are running towards you, and you're running through the tunnel or whatever. You can write games like that with two-dimensional arrays. Okay, I'm trusting y'all to raise your hand and say, help, I've got syntax errors. So here's our example of a nested for loop. Determine each student's average score. The outer loop counts for the number of students. So it's for student is equal to 1, student is less than or equal to the max students. The inner loop counts the number of exams. For test is equal to 1, test is less than or equal to the max tests. So they enter a score, they add it to the sum, to the total, until the the maximum number of tests is exceeded. Then they print out the average for that student, and they add 1 to the student number, and they repeat. So this happens over and over and over right there. Inner loop goes through all repetitions of each repetition of the outer loop. Just like our printing our asterisk. This one happens over and over and over and over. When it's finally done, then we fall out of that loop, something ticks, we increase something, and we go back up to the top, and then we repeat this one over and over and over and over. So in our asterisk program, how many asterisks do we print out? Right here. If we're making a 10 by 5 box of asterisks, how many did we print out? Somebody's awake.
50.
Yeah, we did 50. And the reason for that is because we repeated this chunk of code 50 times. How many times did we repeat this print end of line?
5, 6, 10.
10 actually, because we had 10 rows, and row is our outer counter. So this whole chunk of code from here to here repeated 10 times. And then this inner loop repeated 5 times for each iteration of the outer loop, for a total, for a multiplication of 50. So the inner loop repetitions complete sooner than the outer loop, just because, the inner loop's what's done first, and then the outer loop ticks again. The total number of repetitions is the product, the multiplication of the iterations of the two loops. Using files for data storage. This is an entirely new topic, and I don't want to start talking about it today. Gee, how could I stretch out this class for another 10 minutes?
What's your favorite anime?
Well, let's see. I like Urusei Yatsura. I like old anime. I don't know new anime. Ranma.
He's talking to me.
Will this be on the next test?
This is
Just
important
kidding.
shit. He's talking about Eminem.
Anime. Yeah. And Battleship Yamato.
Star Blazers.
It's probably like
Take a look at these up
one
there.
up at the very
Fuck
top.
yes.
Send them to me, please.
Dude, I'm gonna label it Star Blazers and send you more of that hentai shit with the bleacher girls, the spikes.
Dang. Everything worked out?
Oh, there's such thing as a Yamato class battleship. This is like a real terminology in military in Japan. It's also the name of space battleship Yamato.
The live action version of that's pretty neat.
It is live action. Okay, I'm looking this up too. Sorry, somebody asked, one of the two of you asked me a question.
Yeah.
Oh, you want me to link the Nathan?
Yes.
Remind me to send you links. You're like asking for downloads for the videos or?
Why does this print like that?
Infinitely, while true, you don't break. Don't tell my heart, my achy breaky heart, you just don't see
It
it.
should stop when Rose becomes free.
Tell my heart, my achy breaky heart, it might blow up Japan. Woo!
Should just quit when Rose exceeds Maxwell.
Yeah, your forward will. It's not gonna break out of the wild loop though. You're gonna have to.
What is this? There we
Fucking
go.
ninja. It's hiding from you.
I was like, what is going on?
Don't tell my heart, my achy breaky
Oh,
heart.
it's not.
I'm a Hannah Montana's dad. Billy Ray Cyrus is such a hottie. He has a neck beard. Had a neck beard at one point in time before he grew a soul patch and became a woman. Hold on, dude. Okay, so what's wrong now?
I got this.
Nothing's wrong? Okay, because I haven't even written that yet. I don't know. Maybe I should. I don't know. Print for x equals 0.
I figured we were just doing stuff. I didn't know if we were doing any class project.
God damn it. Japanese people. Making better cartoons than Americans. More entertaining, more emotional.
Careful.
Why you make me cry, Japan? What am I doing? Max Rose. Why is it Max? Why isn't it like Jamal Rose? Do you hate black people? Do you hate them? Why don't you write Jamal there? Oh. I'm sorry. I'm gonna now copy That's paying good attention.
Okay.
It's max hoods,
That work.
max hood reps. What? Go a little crazy? What, you don't need me to declare my for loop conditional the 0DG, ADG, HAD, FHS, DFJ, HDSF, GNDJ, SD,
Not really.
FGND, FJ.
Semicolon.
So, fuck you. Semicolon, semicolon. Max rows was only 5. Max rows is dragon.
Dragon?
Yes.
Totally makes sense.
Dude, that's a good way to store more than you're supposed to. You can just declare it as a string and then give it like the ASCII value.
Because it closed.
You don't need an arbitrary
So
precision
it thought that
library
the
to have
rest of
like a
this code was no
really
longer
large
closed
integer.
that function, but it wasn't giving us a good error message.
Max. Call
Okay.
on.
Sure thing.
All right, guys, let's cook up a homework assignment based on this stuff. Let's make it grueling and all sorts of horrible words. No, I'm kidding.
Make it so hard I don't even want to do it.
Yeah. Okay. The first part of the assignment is just going to be to enter the code on page 65 and to make it work. Okay. That's real easy. So, enter the code on page 65 of chapter 5 PowerPoint. Add to that a loop that displays all the numbers that are divisible by 10 between 100 and 1000. That's enough. Okay, so it's like a three-minute assignment.
It's a really good assignment, I think. I feel like we should have a class project to write a botnet on JavaScript banner ads to vote you like teacher of the year or something. That would be kind of fun.
I wouldn't mind that. Yeah,
Like have a
that's our
botnet.
class
You
project.
gotta share the winnings with us. Like cut the trophy up into pieces and melt it down.
All right, did everybody type all this in while we were going along so we could make this an in class and y'all get credit for it? Let's do that.
Kevin didn't. I tried.
Upload anything. You'll get credit for being here. Okay.
I'm mostly finished. He knows that I know C++. He saw the other project I'm working on.
All right, so take your CPP file, even if it doesn't completely work, and upload it into inbox J.
That's the problem with white America, John. You went to work.
No, White America doesn't.
You get put on welfare for the state stone. John, I don't know what folder I saved my project in. Oh, okay.
There's a project that I had to, was what you're working on.
Oh. Have you seen my, oh. Never mind then. It doesn't even tell you what you wanted to hear. Have you seen my profile picture for my D2L account? I'm gonna show you just a second after I submit this. Okay. piece of truss that I dare it not show you the picture. You can see it pretty decently. This is when I was your age. I was maybe 20 years old. It's a little piece of truss that I made out of dowel rod and adhesive and paper. And that's a picture of me pretending it's a wiener.